Using hyperparameter like epoch, what we are telling is how many times you had to make the neural network iterate over your data set until the layers got whatever features they needed to capture to get the job done. So in short, the number of times you have trained your neural network. So in each epoch, each sample in the training data set gets an opportunity to update the internal model parameters, and epoch is comprised of one or more batches. One way to look at an epoch is it is a for loop over what? Over the number of times where each loop proceeds the over the training data set. Now within this for loop, there is another nested loop. That is the batch of samples, where one batch has specific batch size and the number of samples. So the 7616 samples here, they will get iterated 15 times. The more the number of iterations, the more the neural network tends to give accurate result, provided there is enough variation in the data that you're offering. If out of 7616 images, you have 200 of the same kind of bolt or same kind of nut, then the learning will be so tailor-made that every other nut and bolt with any small variation, it will not classify. That is why there is a need to have a large sample and a varied sample, but with the same distribution. In each epoch, these samples, they will go not at one time because the number of layers are limited, and you need to make the training happen at a granular level. You select your batch size. For Tulakdar, they have chosen 64 at a time. So after this, you need to evaluate your model. So weights get updated to reduce the loss error. It is commonly called as cost. When cost is reduced, you get best accuracy. Cost is the measure of inaccuracy. Cost functions are evaluating how badly the model is performing. The algorithm predicts incorrectly, cost increases. After training 15 epochs, we can see that the loss is coming down. However, if you were to train this in practice, 15 may not be enough for you. It is all down to what is the image set that you're working on. So they stopped their testing once they got a accuracy exceeding 95%. But if you want to detect some serious disease, like whether somebody has a kind of cancer or not, then it can even be further increased until it is 99%. So random forest algorithm. This algorithm is used a lot in literature. A brief way to look at it is that if one tree cannot decide for you properly, then use multiple trees, use them with some kind of randomness, and then bring them together through majority voting, and then you finally do the prediction. So one way to look at it is the decision trees that are given from base learner, plus you do some bagging, which is row replacement through sampling. Then you do feature bagging, that is column sampling. Then you do aggregation, that is based on the mean, median, and majority vote. Now, using different samples of data to train each individual tree, the main problem that they have can be reduced. That is training data overfitting. This is something that plagues every machine learning, deep learning algorithm out there, that is overfitting. So if the training of a forest is done with lots of trees, then each of them gets trained with different data. This problem can be addressed. Each tree can have one kind of data overfitting, but overall forest gets tuned to different data sets. So small portion of the whole data is to be applied when you train each individual tree. We increase the randomness of the forest so that the overfitting is reduced. However, the performance can also come down. Too much randomness means it's not actually catching on to any feature. So most random forest implementations, like which you can find in the library which I had shown at the very start, scikit-learn library, they will do what? They will pick sample of training data so that it is same size as original data set. However, not the same data set. And that is what it is. It is random sampling. It generally provides a good bias variance compromise. So one more alternative is XGBoost. So in XGBoost, it is also an ensemble learner. Okay. In ensemble learning, some of the things that happen is parallelized tree building, tree pruning using depth first approach, cache awareness and out of core computing, regularization for avoiding overfitting, efficient handling of missing data, inbuilt cross validation capability. Extreme gradient boosting is one of the most favored algorithms used in Kaggle competitions. You can use it for learning tasks like regression, classification, and ranking. Generally, mostly for classification. So main thing is the gradient boosting framework. What it will do is it will push the competition limits of the machine and it will offer you a scalable, portable selection. Gradient boosting is a machine learning technique for regression and classification. Okay. So there is an ensemble. Ensemble means collection. Okay. Weak prediction models. This is what is a decision tree. Okay. In that stage-wise fashion, there is boosting done, and it generalizes them by allowing the optimization of a arbitrary loss function, differentiable loss function. So with XGBoost, how to use it? So one of the ways is in R. The R package XGBoost. It's an interface to XGBoost library. Very popular among R users. Amazing feature is not only does it produce better prediction performance compared to other algorithms in general, but also completes the task with quite faster speed than its peers. It does parallel competition on single machine, can go up to 10 times faster than the other gradient boosting packages. So in the Tulakdar et al., their code, they have you can basically break it down into libraries. Okay, these libraries are for initializing, like pandas and all these other libraries, the CNN libraries, then all these other data manipulation libraries. Then you have to choose which GPU you want to use. Then you have to take the image data generator, that FreeCAD API that I was talking about. You have to take the output from that folder into your convolutional neural network. In any kind of publication effort, in in spite of your favorite model, you also have to contrast it with a competing model. Here they have chosen visual geometry groups VGG16. Then they do the model training, then visualization and test function. One more application of deep analytics is by Kumar et al. Inside this Subex Limited. It's a listed company. They are doing deep analytics based cyber security defense. Okay. So dashboarding decisions and actionable insights, model fitting, data lake, make and manage. These are some of the common tasks they undertake in order to be able to offer protection against cybersecurity risk. So the frauds, they can be broadly two kind of categories there are: incoming users and onboarded users. Incoming users means people who are about to become your customers. There they get diverted through websites that are trying to look like you. Similarly, there will be some affiliates and all. Affiliate marketing is a real thing, but using a affiliate code and then redirecting it to offer the content under unauthorized use is illegal. Similarly, for onboarded users, their subscription. So if they get a message saying that your subscription billing link has changed, kindly update it. Unsuspecting users who don't see the full proper spelling of the email and don't confirm with the company's official email, they end up falling prey for all this. Internet protocol frauds, VoIP, voice over internet protocol bypass frauds. So you will see a data center calling you and telling you आपका आधार कार्ड update करना है, detail दीजिए, OTP दीजिए. We hear this so many times. And denial of service. You're trying to log into your account, but it will not open. Very difficult condition then. So let's come back to mechanical manufacturing. So toolware monitoring of a retrofitted CNC milling machine by Hesser DF et al. Here, they're trying to see the feasibility of whether toolware can be demonstrated and whether this toolware can be predicted. So the machine they are using is a Deckel Mahon DMU 35. The spindle speed is as shown here, 4,245 rotations per minute. Width is 3 mm for the tool. The feed, that is the workpiece, is 680 mm, and they are passing it by per minute. Cut depth is 18 mm. So they are applying an accelerometer BMA 280. It has capability to communicate with the Bosch XDK, which is the data acquisition system, over Bluetooth 4.0 and Wi-Fi. So the CNC machine, they have retrofitted it. This XDK sensor doesn't come with the machine. It can very much happen so that in your use case, when you go to the lab or industry you're partnering with, the machines manufacturing system are old and don't have necessary sensors. Sensors become your features. You need to add the sensor if it is not there. Here they have added the sensor. Sensor is doing wireless communication with Bosch XDK data acquisition system. Sensor is BMA 280 accelerometer. Sometimes the network is unpredictable. Actually, it's many times unpredictable. Let's just give the benefit of the doubt sometimes. Then will we lose the data of the whole experiment? So there needs to be some fault tolerance. There needs to be a micro SD card also that can save data and do some data logging in the absence of the network. So the sensor is placed next to the processed material on the table of the computerized numeric control CNC milling machine. And in the position, induced vibrations from the mount milling process are transferred to the sensor. The sensor signal records relative movement of tool, and this data requires further processing. Most of the time, any sensor data will have noise, will have spikes, will have sudden kind of erroneous inputs which you need to filter out. So what is their approach? They are trying to make supervised learning. So their normalized acceleration, they are trying to reduce the size and complexity. What is the positive they are getting from this? They are using the root mean square envelope. It's a milling motion up and down, and then standard deviation area. And then they are comparing, they are using this data that they've generated from the sensor collection, and they're training a artificial neural network with back propagation. So one thing I found in several articles for implementation of deep learning in the manufacturing domain, you can even get away without actually telling which algorithm you are using just by mentioning artificial neural networks. That also works. So they have just mentioned that it is backpropagation artificial neural network. And they're comparing it. So like I said, we need to compare it with something else. So one of the compared algorithms is k nearest neighbor. The other is support vector machine. Okay. In k nearest neighbor, it will assign a similarity based label. And in the support vector machine, it is a Gaussian kernel. Tool state is a binary here. Can be a new tool or worn out tool. Okay. The input vector, if it is too large, training and validation steps become computationally expensive, meaning it will take you longer to train each iteration, then you will have to work on the errors of each iteration. So some initial level you can reduce the signal complexity, which is what they have done. That is why this root mean square envelope is needed. Envelope signal is split. So I mentioned the up and down milling. It will all look as coming, it will look like it is as one thing. If you split it, then it's better. Because then you can train the variance in the up milling and down milling separately. Input vector size is a time series of the envelope signal. Just to summarize, they did supervised regression using neural networks, k nearest neighbor, machine, support vector machine. The name of the CNC tool that they had used, Deckelbaum DMU35, data acquisition system is Bosch XCK, measured parameter, accelerometer, milling process vibration, relative tool movement. So what they have key result identified is the remaining useful life of tool prediction. Majority of the applications of deep analytics is to answer this one way. What is the remaining useful life of the tool? Can you predict that? And they found that the neural network is offering better than the KNN and SVM because see they have just that one use case for this, that one particular DMU 35M Deckelbaum CNC machine. The challenge increases if you have to train your neural network to predict accurately over different make and model of different companies CNC machines. So those of you who get tie-ups with industry on CNC machining, you can think of extrapolating ANNs for predicting the remaining useful life of tool. Similarly, next we'll look at motor failure and how Gustavo Scalabrini and Sampao and et al. Have done this. So they have taken the sensor input and they are running it through a sampling window, applying Fourier transform so that they can set the variable values, vibration growth rate per variable, failure times, effective value of the amplitude or frequency they are getting through this formula. Square root of 1 upon n summation of I to n x of I squared. X of I could be each amplitude, could be each frequency, and n is the total number of amplitude of frequency. And from that they are trying to get the average failure time. So they're trying to give us a method to generate training data based on vibration measurement. you can create your own data or you can get your own data from Kaggle-like competition. When you try to create your own data in the article, you have to mention it is a simulated data set. So failure time is calculated in the vibrating system by means of amplitude and frequency data. So the ANN needs to be predict that failure time of an equipment. So here they are taking the equipment as a cooling fan and accelerometer is coupled to measure vibration. To simulate the vibration and to stepwise increase it, they are using magnets. Now each pair of amplitude and frequency measurement, we don't know when the failure is coming, but it could be associated with the failure time. So that is why you need to split amplitude also and frequency also. Efficiency of the model training is
In
demonstrated
this process,
comparative
we have
test.
to consider that the
Yes,
concept
please.
of the inverted, the concept of inverted organizational chart, and the system of intra-company internal quality.
Excuse
Next,
me.
the
What is
horizontal and vertical integration of functions and activities.
I think
So
somebody
these
has joined the room, is
have to
it?
discuss. Okay.
I'm
So
listening to
first,
some audio.
see the first one is see that the concept of the inverted
Can you
organizational
please
chart.
mute yourself,
So
sir?
basically, we have to consider three significant changes on. One is conceptually, and two
Who
requiring
is
the
speaking?
organizational alignment.
Hello,
So the first
organizers.
one, we have to consider that uh,
Can you moderate, please? Okay. Okay. So I'll continue. So the model here is demonstrated by comparative test with random forest support vector machine. And in the articles that you would like to publish in the future, you will have to give some kind of cross validation. So k-fold cross validation. K meaning how many chunks of your total data you are making. And each classifying algorithm you are running through each chunk and seeing. So fault diagnostic systems play an important role, and this whole approach is to help you to understand how to simulate the setup using a fan and a accelerometer and some magnets. So experimental setup can be simple, but the context has to be set correctly. Then inside that you have to show how you are different from the traditional random forest and support vector machine, and how you are implementing your artificial neural network, which library you are using. So the result that they have obtained is like they are showing that the vibration behaviors that are simulated and the data that is collected to produce the training and test data set approach, you could use it in any other fan. So they are using a computer cooling fan, but it can be extrapolated to all fans that have blades. I'm specifically saying that have blades because Dyson company has made fanless, that is a bladeless fan. So there this approach will not work. So the fan is model number AKFN059 12 centimeter fan. It's a small fan. And the accelerometer model number is MMA8452Q. Okay. So the data they are collecting is through a microcontroller using inter-integrated circuit protocol, I2C. Very primitive, straightforward data collection protocol. Okay. Moving on. So in R, there is this RSNSS library which they have used, and they are choosing a multi-layer perceptron which they have operated with back propagation. So the neural network, you can choose which input function. They have chosen a logistic type input function. Sensor inputs are passed through that. Weight initialization. You can either have a preset weight or you can let it be random. Gradient descent. Here the step width is 0.85. The number of, see here, the epochs is so high, it is 50,000 epochs. But in the earlier case, Tulakdar et al. Were able to get away with just 15 epochs. So epochs keep changing from case to case. The hidden layer, just one hidden layer with 25 neurons. So this is how their setup looks. Random forest that they have used, it is a tree predictor. Trees are dependent on the values of the random input and the same distribution for all trees in the forest. Several simple predictors, that is each tree is used. And then you are randomly initializing them, so therefore you are reducing the overfitting. Inside R, there is a random forest library. It's called random forest itself. So the choice of parameters is through trial and error. The number of trees they chose was 500. Number of variables sampled in each division is 3 minimum. Okay, and the minimum size of the terminal nodes, that is the node size, is 5. The number of times data is exchanged per tree to verify the importance of the variable is 1. So in summary, they have used these various techniques using this cooling fan, that is the Akasa AKFN059, and they've also put to use the support vector machine. So here there is they are trying to map the input vector elements to high dimensional feature space using a non-linear mapping process in the case of SVM. So it is somewhat similar to an artificial neural network in that it is extremely flexible. Training data set entry point of view. Okay, flexible in terms of whichever entry point of view you take in your data set. There's a better generalization than tree-based techniques. R also has a SVM function library. The library is E1071. Now here you're trying to get the lowest root mean square error value. Kernel used in training and prediction, that is the kernel, is equal to radial basis. So cost of constraint violation, called cost, is 10. Then they are using
Sir,
kernel calculation formula lambda and they're setting it as 10. The tolerance they have set as 1. And insensitive loss function epsilon, they are setting it as 0.005.
అట్లేను సార్ కాల్ వస్తుంది ఇందులో నుంచి నాకు అయితే నాకు కాల్ అటెండ్ చేయగానే
We are now looking at acceleration, process vibration, relative tool movement. These are the measured parameters. The training data set they formed through frequency spectrum of the measured vibration.
సునీత మేడం
What they
మీరు
have found is
అండి సునీత మేడం మీరు
during the ANN training, the learning algorithm tends to reduce the output error iteratively. Weighted sum of squared error for the K1, they are finding that the error asymptotically reduces to 0. Training phase involved k-fold cross validation. So like I said, you have to make blocks and you have to put each classifier the same block, that is 1-fold. Similarly, if you have it done 5 times, it is 5-fold. So here they are saying k-fold. After each training, prediction model is tested with the test data set. So training data set, test data set difference is always there. On top of that, you're making further blocks for training and for testing. So by seeing the root mean square error calculation, the estimated and predicted values, it was possible for them to say whether the generated model had precision and whether it had actually reflected the system properly. Generalization of the data set. For this, they have taken vibration amplitude values as model's original training dataset, but with different growth rate values 0.015, 0.03, and 0.04. Totaling how many observations? 9180. So generalization dataset as another aspect to it, that is the average amplitude values. So for each cooler motor rotation speed, 3 weight settings of the blade. So remember I said magnets are used. If magnets are used, you decide how many magnets you want to attach to each blade. Here they are chosen with 3. So by increasing that also, you can get another further 153 observations. So they have found that values generated for these datasets did not exceed the max and min values for the model training dataset, and further, it is not impairing the performance or it is not reducing the performance of the tree-based techniques. That is, it is possible to observe and these behaviors presented in the k-fold cross-validation are factual. Short-term predictions for ANN, random forest, and medium-term prediction for ANN and random forest. Here you see some difference. So neural network takes longer time. If you need quick prediction, you should go with random forest. So the statistical properties need to be same. If you are going to use magnets, you cannot have several different sized magnets. You want to increment it in a set way, a repeated way. These are some common good practices of scientific design itself. Okay, one blade you are putting one set, next blade you want to increment it by the set same quantity. Okay, so that the spiking is reduced, the outliers are reduced. So next we see how machine learning for predictive maintenance in the case of printers is done by Adrian Binding et al. Adrian Binding. So inside a printer, ink is flowing. Ink has speed and pressure, which is controlled by the proportional integral derivative controller. Now the spray is not going directly to the paper. It is going through an Anilox roller, then through that to the printing plate, and then the excess ink is raked off through the Anilox roller with a doctor blade. These are some of the typical constraints of the system. So you should choose a system which the literature is not really, too flooded with, so that there is more chance of acceptance for you. So here in the ink system, there are a lot of sensor inputs also. There is dynamic workflow happening across all these moving parts. There is a PID controller, there are sensors. So then something can be applied in this. Some machine learning can be done. The printing machine is used for a large variety of small batch printing jobs. Whenever the batch size reduces, it is inversely proportional to the planned downtime. The downtime also can be two types. It can be planned, it can be unplanned. So you are trying to say whether need of predictive maintenance is there or not. True or false? before the system achieves or gets caught up in some big log jam of paper, if you could predict that, okay, now it is the time to check the proper entire working so that the repair time comes down. Proactively open the machine before the machine makes you open it. That is the point. If you open it too many times, then your plant maintenance time is increasing, your overall equipment efficiency calculation is decreasing. So data collection, transmission in a printing press is not that simple. Typical printing press machines, even though they have sensors, the ones which were purchased several years back, as is usually the case, the wireless network capability is very poor. Even today, we see if we want multiple phones to talk to the same printer, it is such a hassle. So this is one more way to visualize how various printers and sensors were data logged into one common place. This one common place approach was missing for that printing offset system. It is how in chemical industry, multiple mixers and other processing aspects are seen in one SCADA system. So something similar they have done here so that they can collate data from various machines, that is the printing machines, and see is there a pattern before a error occurs. So what are some of the data, the feature that they are using? Starting and end time, major and minor error codes. Okay, operator entered free from annotation. It can be that the downtime and steps taken to remedy an issue solely on the judgment of the operator. Process data. Okay. So every minute, 100 operational variables regarding ambient environment such as temperature, humidity, heat, these all things are getting reported. And historically logging the data from multiple printers is necessary. Data will only tell you what is the way errors keep coming up. But if there are missing values, then there is a roadblock. There will also be some measurement errors. So just blindly you cannot take the data and run with it. You have to clean the data. So that missing values, extreme outliers or negative measurements can, they should not skew the result. They should not make your machine learning algorithm get overfitted to the exceptional cases. So cross entropy. So these are some of the evaluation criteria for this article. Cross entropy is commonly used in machine learning as a loss function. What is it measuring? It is actually coming from the field of information theory, building upon entropy, and it is the difference between two probability distributions, closely related to but different from the other entropy, that is it is telling the relative entropy between two probability distributions. Okay. So cross entropy is also related and often confused with logistic loss called log loss. Although the two measures are derived from a different source, when using them as loss function for models which need classification, they will both measure and calculate the same quantity, but they can be used interchangeably. Area under receiver operating characteristic curve and the receiver operating characteristic curve. These both require you to use true positives and false negatives. We will further cover them in the subsequent slides. True positives, false negatives, true negatives. This is how they are looking at the performance of their models. So let's briefly summarize that regression can be linear and logistic. Just because they are both part of the regression family doesn't mean they treat the same variable. No, linear is there to treat continuous quantity. Logistic is there to treat yes and no, 0, 1. You decide what is the category. This is going to depend on the threshold that we have set. So for regression, the universal simple way to denote it is predictor variable is depending on your constant plus constant into your input features plus whatever errors. In the case of logistic regression, it is log of whatever predictable variable you want, predictor variable divided by 1 minus y, okay, is equal to probability of event when there are no variables plus b1 into x1 plus b2 into x2 and so on, whatever number of features you have that are x1 and x2 where they are independent. Parameter tuning. So random forest and extreme gradient boosted trees. So in the random forest, the number of trees, these are some of the parameters that we need to tune. Max depth of each tree, split criteria where you decide when to make the new split, and the features per split. In the case of extreme gradient boosted trees, some things will be commoner because they are both using trees. One is a forest, the other is a boosted trees forest, but they are not calling it forest so that it remains different to understand. But they both need trees. So some features will carry forward from RF also. But in addition to the number of trees and max depth, something called learning rate you need to notice and the subsample rate. So now what was that true positive? In this case, it is operator caught the fault. Okay. Fn false negative, there is a missed fault. False positive, it is checked for, but no fault occurred. True negative is not checked and no problem, no fault occurred. So these terms are put up in the form of a matrix. This matrix is called confusion matrix, so that you can further visualize them. You checked for fault occurred, it is true positive. It didn't occur, it is false positive. You didn't check for fault, but the fault had occurred, then it's a false negative. You didn't check for fault and no fault occurred, so it is a true negative. Now when you plot the rate, then we get the receiver operating characteristic curve. True positive divided by true positive plus false positive, that gives us sensitivity, that is the y-axis, that is the true positive rate. False positive divided by false positive plus true positive gives us the false positive rate, which is the x-axis. ROC curves are between 0 and 1, where 1, 1 and in the case like, yeah, so the true positive rate and the false positive rate is equal between the 1, 1 and 0, 0, that slope that you're seeing, which means that your model is not able to distinguish. What you want is it to go towards the true positive rate, that is the y side. And of your various tested models, whether you are using SVM or random forest or XG boosted, whichever is having the highest area under curve, that is the one which you should go ahead with. This true positive rate is also sometimes called as a recall. So the threshold that is applied to the cutoff point in probability between positive and negative classes, which by default could be set to 0.5, halfway between each outcome, 0, 1 on each side. Okay, but the trade-off exists, yeah, between true positive rate and false positive rate. Changing of the threshold of classification changes the balance of predictions. Okay, you can take it, move it towards the true positive rate at the expense of false positive rate, and vice versa. So the true positive and false positive for different threshold values, if we evaluate them, then the curve that we are seeing will come up. Now, a classifier that has no discriminative power between positive and negative classes will form a diagonal line. Okay, so that is why I said you have to steer away from the diagonal line in order for your results to be accepted. Otherwise, it has no discriminative power. False positive rate of 1 and a true positive rate of 1, 1, 1. Yeah, so that is the diagonal line's last point. Now, points below the diagonal line have worse performance and no skill. The diagonal line itself doesn't discriminate, and anything below the diagonal line is not important. So let's summarize. So logistic regression, extreme gradient boosted trees, and random forest machine learning techniques were compared so that you can understand the printer's downtime based on the sensor inputs. Concerned unit is the ink flow system. The measured parameters, several were there. They were mentioned earlier, like humidity, print substrate, tension, etc. So different papers, you can have different level of printing depth or force. So now logistic regression, random forest done via Python library scikit-learn. Feature engineering was done. So they had to use Z-score, standard deviation, autocorrelation, rolling trends, power spectra. Okay, so now let's look at Falamarzi et al. What they have taken is track gauge deviation. Every weekend, particularly Sundays, at least twice a month, sometimes even 4 times in a month, there is a mega block. This track gauge deviation in the Mumbai Railways, they do it and they correct it on the Sundays. But this is done manually. Manual inspection, manual correction. What happens is you cannot board the train as often as you would like to. You can board once per hour. The train frequency comes down because people are manually checking the tracks. In Australia, the lines are larger than the manpower. They don't want to manually go around checking the tracks. So they need to use a system. What they are using to gauge the track deviation is a laser. Non-contact optimal laser measurement system. Each segment is of 10 meters. So they are using the track code. Okay, so the data set has track code, which is each 10 meter, they are labeling them as a code. And then the data set has measurement location, it has track segments, and then they must confirm whether the data set is having normal distribution. For that, they're using two tests, Kolmogorov-Smirnov and Shapiro-Wilk. So the whole point is the million gross tons. And this rail profile, rail type, million gross tons, these are some of the parameters that you will use to predict on the deviation of the tracks. Here they are doing 5-fold cross validation. Okay. So they're making 5 blocks out of their entire data set and making each model, such as in ANN and SVM and all of the other that one would like to use, you need to do it block wise. So the degradation can happen in various patches after 100 kilometers, 180 kilometers. So you need to train a multi-layer feed-forward artificial neural network with 2 hidden layers, according to them, for solving this kind of problem. Similarly, approach of using support vector machine is used where they are trying to see a mechanical machine that is using the switch rails, from one direction to the opposite direction to prepare for different routes for trains. Here they are seeing the failure rate of that machine. So the data that they were looking for was provided by the alternate current machine that the Japanese have provided. It's called as a point machine. So the results of system validation for this they are comparing. If it is not, if it is not for fitting under the 3 standard deviation rule, then they would not accept that. So 99.7% of the data satisfied it, and so they kept it. What are the other parameters that are affecting the tracks? Like I said, million gross tons, rail support, that is what is underneath the tracks, and rail profile, this can be 41 kg, 43 kg, and so on. The rail support, it can be concrete and steel, or it could be asphalt and concrete, and so on. Then the year of track installation, that will tell how many years has passed. MGT curve radius, but since there are so many segments, it is called a curve radii. Then previous gauge deviation parameters. So these are some of the continuous examples, continuous parameter examples. The other parameters including rail support, rail profile, rail track surface, they are categorical. Before developing models, the significance they need to understand, so that for that purpose they were using Pearson coefficient analysis and one-way ANOVA analysis. Now, data set of this study, they have set into 2 sets, straight and curved segment. Because it is train, there will be so many curved segments also. Everything cannot be straight. So their statistical analysis tells them that the track gauge deviation previous year, rail type, are significant. That is, the p-value is less than 0.05 for predicting the output variable. Okay, so the other variables were removed from the computation. Now in curved segments, track gauge deviation in the previous year is also still significant. Okay, and based on literature, so in each domain there is some standard that they accept. So for this analysis, they are accepting the adjusted R-square. This is pretty common in several other data science or analytical approaches. And also the mean squared error, which we have seen in the previous cases also. Okay, so the whole experiment is happening in Melbourne tram network. Based on the results of various proposed models of the AMM and the ANN and the SVM, gauge deviation value of straight track segment, they found it is satisfying. The value of coefficient of determination was above 0.9. For curve segment, it is somewhat similar to the existing literature, and the coefficient of determination was above 0.7. For them, they found that the ANN is more accurate in gauge prediction of straight segments, while the SVM is more accurate in gauge prediction of curved segments. These are some of the variables that we had discussed. Track surface, layer type, and then looking at the significance through Pearson correlation, one-way analysis of variance. To summarize, so the total track length was 250 kilometers across 25 routes. And the measurement system, acquisition system is a non-contact optical laser. Track geometry data, gauge measurement data, these are some of the measured parameters. So tracking the gauge deviation, that is one of the key results. Okay, AN is better in one, whereas SVM is better in the curve segments. Now let's take a look at what Janssen et al. Are using. Thermal image and vibration based rotating machinery analysis. So ROI, this is region of interest. So from each frame, they're trying to extract the regional of interest. So you said thermal, now you're saying frame because it is an infrared camera. From that infrared camera, continuous field, the system must detect conditions and faults. Infrared thermal imaging or the infrared camera, image processing and machine learning. This is the different approach. So now from that they are trying to do feature extraction. What is the features that are of interest for them from the segmented areas inside the region of interest, which contains information related to detection. So to minimize the feature before sending it for classification, they're using windowing. So they are trying to find the outer raceway fault. So earlier, see, there was a simulated data set. Simulated means generated by you. Okay. That was what? That was the fan blade with magnets. Here the simulated data set is made by putting 3 notches on the rotating machine. Okay. So vibration measuring. There they are doing windowing and they're using discrete Fourier transform. Amplitude at rotating frequency, and they're trying to do reduction of the noise in the frequency. Thermal imaging is to identify imbalance introduced oscillations. This is a term in the rotating machinery for ball bearings and all those fault detection systems. So they find the main features to be kurtosis, crest, root mean square error, all pass frequency of outer raceway fault. So raceway damage will cause a peak at the bearings fault frequencies. That is what they're trying to locate. Only infrared imaging, what is the limitation? Features extracted from established vibration analysis techniques only. Okay, combination of both is missing. So up till now, little research that they have, only they were the ones to propose using this combination. Okay, multi-sensor systems. So it will detect a cracked rotor or coupling misalignment in rotating machine using vibration data and temperature. So bearing damage, misalignment, imbalance, that can be the focus. So here system is proposed where both the infrared thermal imaging and vibration data So the system extracts features from both sensor streams and fuses them together. Now, fused features are then given to the classification algorithm. They are generating two data sets for their purposes. Now, in both the data set, 5 different bearings conditions are created. So for each data set, like in the last 10 minutes, when steady state is reached and infrared thermal video is captured together with accelerometer measurement. Okay, so the data set 1, 5 bearings into 8 conditions, so that is 40 readings are made. Similarly, for data set 2, 5 bearings into 12 conditions, 60 recordings are made. So on and so forth. They took 19 samples per pipeline feature. So they divided the pipeline. Okay, in each pipeline there is vibration, there is thermal. Then the second pipeline, again vibration, thermal. Similarly, they are concatenating all these 4 inside the form of a feature. Now the total space covers 19 samples per pipeline feature into 8 conditions into 5 bearings. So that is total 760 readings. They're using random forest. It is an ensemble of decision trees. Okay, we have covered random forest, so I'll keep it short. Here, Gini score minimization is important for the random forest. And assigning the final node. Now, hyperparameter is optimized via grid search. One of the reasons why random forest keeps coming up is because it is good at handling continuous information. So in the vibration, the amplitude at random frequency is 1, then amplitude at ball pass fault BPFO is another, then the rotation frequency, yeah. So different in amplitude only there are different important features. So this is again domain dependent. So you could only have like less or you could have more. This is something that your prior art will tell you. But here what they are doing is they're combining 2 approaches of thermal and vibration. So for rotation frequency, the feature from infrared thermal imaging that they're combining is standard deviation along the y-axis. Then for amplitude at the BPFO, then they are combining it with Gini coefficient. So on and so forth. Some or the other standard deviation they are using alongside BPFO root mean square. So this approaches we have to think what is relevant for us. Machine learning techniques that we talked about. Concerned unit is rotating machinery, data acquisition system, infrared thermal imaging, and then the accelerometer. Okay, beyond the thermal camera, if you require, then thermocouple, so on and so forth. Some of the key results is technique can be used to improve the, the offshore wind turbine performance. Can be applied to manufacturing lines, oil level prediction, and so on and so forth. So Zhang et al., they're using physics-based computing approach. And they are trying to find out the starter degradation, okay, in a power unit, auxiliary power unit. This is their operational flow for the physics-based model. And we can see that it starts with the N peak. Okay. So the idea is to find out the exhaust gas temperature. And in the neural network approach, first thing starts with normalization. Then you are going to try to understand the forward compute, then back propagation, desired accuracy is met, then reiterate. This is what I said, that training requires several epochs, several iterations. If you get the required accuracy, then it's complete. So exhaust gas temperature. So here they are comparing the physics modeling, that is they are taking sensor data, then they are applying the various physics relationships and they are trying to get output. So this is some alternate visualization of how it looks. So they are also using a sigmoid function for cross validation. 80% of it was used in training, 15% validation, 5% testing. So the shaft is speed at peak exhaust gas temperature N peak. Then the ambient temperature T01, then the ambient pressure P01. And the back propagation they've used is a version of the Levenberg Marquardt. This is present inside MATLAB. To summarize, they mainly only compared neural networks with actual physics-based modeling. The gas turbine model number is GTCP 331. It is a 430 kilowatt turbine. And the data acquisition system, this is actually part of the Airbus fleet. Measured parameters, gas path measurements. Okay, let's move on to Gutte et al. Here they are talking about predictive maintenance inside the chip manufacturing assembly line. They are saying that predictive maintenance can be divided into classification and regression. Classification, you are trying to classify the part failure probability. Okay, depending on which threshold you set. And regression, you're trying to say how much time. The regression is on a continuous quantity, right? So it's on time till next failure. Both of these are actually part of supervised learning. Generalized linear models. So the response variable, there are some explanatory variables, x, y, x1, x2, x3 will be used to predict y. Ensemble learning, based learner generation. Ensemble parallel sequential. Parallel means random forest. The error is reduced through averaging. Sequential, like it is using, they're comparing it with gradient boosting and extreme gradient boosting. And then there is convolutional neural networks. So convolution takes place with two subsequent main parts are there inside each convolutional neural network. There's a convolutional layer and a subsampling layer. In the convolutional layer, the kernel samples down the 32 by 32 into 28 by 28, and the kernel size you have to decide. Here they have chosen 5 by 5 kernel size. The subsampling part will try to reduce the size via pixel averaging. So many different methods there. So what their main approach is super learning. What they're saying, it is also a kind of cross validation, but actually the super learning paper in 2007 explains a lot more in detail. This paper was published by Mark J. Vanderlaan, University of California, Berkeley. And here, as you can see, there is a kind of method where they are doing a kind of k-fold validation, but they have made some tweaks to it. So the outcomes are in a validation block, and then the validation block, they have some parameters to select the model and to do fitting of the observed into the predicted. So each learner is trained on the full data set and it is compared. This is broadly an architecture of how they are trying to operate. They are doing trainings of base learners. Base learners can be random forest, extreme gradient. They can also be CNN. Then you are trying to see the predicted outcomes inside the validation block. This validation block, there are libraries in Python so that you can make it come together. Now the data set, they are having 21 sensors for 3 process recipes. The word recipe is used because the whole fabrication process is similar to like in a kitchen, because first something comes, then it is followed by something else. So first there will be a substrate, then on top of that there will be a deposition of a layer of gold or iridium or whatever materials, gallium, silicon, or whatever p-type, n-type junction is needed. As you may recall, Kunal had talked about this silicon level, how switches start making logic happen, why able to have a 0 state or 1 state. So yeah, it is actually a recipe. So the wafer is layer by layer cooked. So here they are dividing the data set in an 80-20 fashion. Now wafer count is telling us how many more outcomes can come out of it. It is one of the indicators of the remaining useful life. So probability of a critical part failure happening when? It is with reference to some event, right? So that event or that variable here is remaining useful life. If there is no buffer, then the assembly line will remain idle for a longer time, causing losses. So if you can get your replacement part ordered in advance, then you can reduce the downtime of your assembly line. So it's a balance between the usage of the current part, because if you switch it out in fear of some major breakdown happening, then each part which is having such a high expense is underutilized. So that is also again a loss. So it's a balance between the part usage and the downtime. So tolerance. So here they have found the tolerance for their remaining useful life time. And similarly, we need to find what is the RUL for the system that we are working on. For them, these numbers are important for that foundry. But these numbers can keep changing based on the area in which we try to apply the prediction. So this is the graph. This is what is unique to using a super learning approach, that you need to bring it all together in this way. So the variable names, recipe, tool sensor, wafer count, okay, and per model, what was the importance of each variable? This you can rank. Inside R, the filter var importance function can be used, and inside Python, there is an explainer inside the delx library. This delx library ported to R also. So here you can take various input fields and bring them together. To summarize, they use various approaches: random forest, deep learning, etc. Concerned unit is the semiconductor wafer unit. Data acquisition system, tools, sensors, process, recipe, wafer count, measured parameters, parts and maintenance, and so on. So it was a brief summary. Now we are looking at wind turbine. Predictive maintenance for wind turbine by Michael Canezzo et al. So what happens is there is not one wind turbine in any wind farm. Wind farms have dozens of these, and they are distributed across several acres, if not several miles. The problem is you need to collate all of that data. And it's a real-time problem. Based on the tentative time for when something goes down, you can go ahead and do some predictive maintenance, such as you can bring in parts for that particular wind turbine, which is in a region where a very harsh wind is blowing, where you can sense that that turbine is going to come down. But then the wind is not a static thing. If it is coming northwest today, it can go southeast tomorrow. We don't know when which wind turbine zone inside the farm is going to face a cyclone level amplitude of wind strength. So then there is a need to monitor the whole farm, and that requires us to have a Hadoop system. Hadoop is a Hadoop is a big data approach. In big data, there are three V's. There is volume, velocity, and veracity. You need your volume of data to be handled, and you need it fast. You need it as close to real time as you can. And the information that you're working on cannot be garbled or missed out, so that you don't have to keep doing missing value imputation again and again. So Hadoop has emerged as a great alternative. Hadoop Data File System, the HDFS, Hadoop Distributed File System. It's a fault tolerant system. It is scalable. Okay, so Hadoop is used here. So to give some context, the global wind energy installations at the end of 2015 alone was already in gigawatts, and it was up to like 430 plus gigawatts. And projection is that it will be added by another 60 gigawatts in 2016 itself. The roadmap for the industry suggests that it will keep growing between 30 and 40% in Europe itself. So what happens when so much of data is coming? A lot of data cleaning needs to be done. Extraction, transformation, and loading, ETL. So the platform that they're trying to create has to be able to manage multiple tables of millions of rows, 10 to 100 times faster than traditional technology. So the key is relevant information in the right format at the right time. Company productivity can go up as much as 3% using these big data frameworks. So there are many ways to fry a fish. Similarly, big data also has multiple implementations. Amazon EMR, Microsoft HD Insight. Yeah, EMR is Elastic MapReduce. So MapReduce is the main function through which Hadoop is able to handle such a huge stream of data. So the data that they are using here is received every 10 minutes. There are 448 different alarm types, 104 parameters, considering the operational data. Wind turbine that works all day will send 144, that is 6 into 24 rows of data per day. And then total 17 wind turbines are in the farm. That is like 2,400 plus new rows of data every day for a total of 1,787 in 2 years, in the best case. The number of daily rows is not that high, as is the case in some other scenarios, like how daily number of pages indexed by Google is an extraordinarily high amount. Because every day somebody is putting out a blog somewhere, somebody is putting out a Facebook post or something and making it public or something, LinkedIn post. So much of data is being produced, and so much work Google is handling through Hadoop and similar systems. Compared to that, this is much smaller. But the idea here is to find an industry where HDFS or Hadoop or similar data science or data analytics or deep analytics implementations have not been done. And wind turbines is something that these guys have found. Kashin Kanizu et al. So what happens in the HDFS is a master-slave architecture. There is a name node, which is also the master node, master server. Then there are data nodes which are working as its slaves. So the name node manages the file system namespace, regulates access to the files by clients, The data nodes manage the storage that is attached to the nodes as they run. Data is formulated into files that are split into one or more blocks. So blocks are stored in one or more nodes. That is also called as persistence. So that, in case some kind of issues happen, like a cyclone-like scenario happens, then there should be some kind of replica of the information. For data acquisition, Apache Kafka is used. Kafka is a streaming platform. So the HDFS is the file system. Hadoop is the overall encompassing term for all these things. These are all interconnected. So Kafka is the streaming platform which will give the messaging. Here, public subscriber distributed messaging system is used. Something similar runs in the background of WhatsApp also, so that so many messages are updated in real time. A topic inside of the terminology of Kafka, it is like a channel or pipeline where messages are published. The topics on Kafka are always multi-subscriber. That is, one topic can have 0, 1, or many consumers subscribe to the data written on it. However, this application of Kaninja et al. Are only using one topic for each wind turbine. There's only one publisher and one consumer per topic. Kafka is a fault-tolerant system. So if any error occurs, published messages are still available, whether or not they have been consumed when the application or Kafka restarted. So even if a cyclone comes, the data will still be persisting. For data processing purpose, Apache Spark is used. So one is for streaming, one is for data processing. Spark is in memory and it is a fast and general engine for large scale data processing. According to Spark's official documentation, it's 100 times faster than the traditional alternatives. Spark is a scalable system because it was designed to work with, Kafka and the whole Hadoop ecosystem. So characteristics that make Spark suitable are like it can process and analyze large volumes of data from various wind turbines, and the application can be developed in Scala, Java, Python, R. Kaninja et al. Have done this in Java. Spark again has 5 modules: Spark Core, Spark Streaming, Spark SQL, MLlib, and GraphX, so that it can provide the requisites required for developing the proposed approach. Okay. So the resource manager will balance between the private cloud resources. So there are different tenants in each cluster. Okay. So Apache Mesos is the resource manager. Now, the Zookeeper is like a configuration holder. It will synchronize and group various services. This is all under cluster management. The predictive maintenance method here is basically dividable into 3 main things: model generator, monitoring agent, and dashboard. If you are having a data stream, once you clean it and keep it in HDFS, then you can start generating a model on that clean data. A monitoring agent is going to keep doing some kind of checking whether there is any upcoming requirement for predictive maintenance. All of this you need to give in the form of a dashboard to your industry partners. So, sir, I would like to know how much time we have left. Hello.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Tell me,
So
sir.
can you update me on the timing?
Sir, another 5 to 10 minutes we can continue, sir, because session should end at 1 o'clock.
Acha.
From 1
Okay,
to
so
2
we
we have a
started
lunch
half
break,
an
and
hour,
after
I
that,
think. Yeah,
yes.
since we started in after half an hour, so some things I'm going to just skip over now. So, but see, out of the 104 parameters, using principal component analysis, you can reduce it down to 99, like those 22 which have like 99% covariance. Covariance is what? It is the product of deviations from the mean, respectively. Formula wise, it can be written as shown. In addition, if you again pass it through Pearson's correlation coefficient, which we have again seen earlier in the tram, there also Pearson's coefficient was used. So you can then group these 22 based on similarity and all, one per group. So then you can further reduce it to 14 parameters. So the predictive maintenance models, they are here using the random forest, the number of trees and max depth. These are some characteristics that you will see again and again whenever a random forest is used. So if you increase the number of trees, what happens? Result is not that impressive. But if you increase the number of max depth of the trees, they found much better fit. If you are able to having the luxury to increase the number of trees as well as the max depth, then you get an even better performance, but it's like very computationally expensive. So you need to take a judgment call whether it is really required or not. So since you have to complete in 5 minutes, I'm now going to take you to an overview of the prediction maintenance process. So we have seen various approaches. This is a researcher at Turkish University, Mr. Zakir, and this is what he has proposed. You use your smart sensor approach and you see that whether the current scenario you can install sensors, because otherwise not, then don't try to break too much of your head, because if there are no sensors, then there is no feature. If there is no feature, then what will we do with it? So you need to be able to have your sensor installed in that location. So installing a sensor inside a nuclear power plant is something super complicated. Outside of what is already there, you cannot install whatever sensors you feel like. So you need to know whether you can sense it or not. Then you need to have the real-time data stream via sensors. So we just saw, to get the data stream from the turbines, the Hadoop system or the Hadoop ecosystem was used. You have to choose which ecosystem you want. Number 3 is the data monitoring. In order to make the data set rich, because see, monitoring is giving you access to fresh data. You are using a part of the monitored data to train your model. If the current real-time monitored data is not there, then the prediction for when the machine will subsequently fail in the future cannot be generated. So the real-time monitoring feed needs to happen. Okay, you may collect the data, you may collect the training data set using a micro SD card in the local node. But if it's not updated and collated, then future prediction becomes difficult. So that is why machines need to be connected. That is why the better the bandwidth of the connection, the more complex data can be interchanged between the edge and the server, edge and the data center, where the edge could be a turbine in the wind farm, or it could be some other operation like a Tesla car. Tesla cars are basically edges, very fancy, very expensive edge computing, yeah, embedded, yeah, it is a cyber physical system, as Kunal ji has covered. So there you are trying to make sure that the 5G will become a large enough highway of information where you can keep going back and forth. Because see, if the scenario changes, if an earthquake happens, then there is a big shift. Then the same city where the training of the neural network of the car was done, it needs to be retrained, because some locations will be blocked off, some locations will be open. So these are not really that hypothetical, because Japan experiences earthquakes several times in a year. That is why you will see very few the Japanese people will trust a self-driving car. Okay, because they are also very fault tolerant now. They are very resilient people now. Yeah, they want to have something that will survive their tsunami and earthquake prone climate. So you need to have that 5G connectedness so that the edge and the data center can talk. So that your cyber physical system can update with your data center, which is having whatever data streaming, data analytics, deep analytics frameworks running. Now you have to build the machine learning using the historical trained data and then using the proactive alerts of future maintenance needs, it has to give on the real-time data. Number 6 is the automatic maintenance ticket. So again, I have given citation to the author's name. I wanted to keep the big picture in front of you. Do not consider not being able to read one text here and there as a big deal, because ultimately for your purposes, you might have to go inside in detail in each paper, who knows, right? So you create automatic maintenance ticket so that the parts can be ordered in advance and so on and so forth. This is a summary of the entire workflow of predictive maintenance publication. Then if you want to see that the various publications by geography, number of publications in 2020 and 2019 and stuff, what is the impact in the predictive maintenance space using the keywords machine learning, using the keywords predictive maintenance. What I'm trying to get your attention to is the keyword deep analytics is not that well used. So if you want, you can take that approach and you can use this virgin territory, enter into predictive maintenance in deep analytics. Yeah. And the geography distribution in India, predictive maintenance articles are not that many. The highest is in United States and China, because these two are the major manufacturing location. Surprisingly, Germany is behind United Kingdom, but actually Germany goes ahead and exports the machines that all the other people are using to manufacture their things. Yeah, deep analytics tools and frameworks. There are several out there. IBM, TensorFlow, like decision optimization from IBM, then Watson Studio from IBM, then H2O. It is a library that can be called from inside R. Amazon SageMaker is a completely online platform where you can use several pre-trained models. Even if you don't want to go to the headache of figuring out which model and all, just go through Amazon SageMaker help documentation. They have several pre-trained models for different industrial use cases. Oracle, Data Science Cloud Service, NIME Analytics and open source alternative. ML in manufacturing challenges. So the data set, very difficult to get the manufacturer to reveal how much quantities of what he's making, because then his competition will know his productive ability and his top line, bottom line. So very rarely you will see that kind of information revealed. So you have to be able to do need identification, value of intervention, model selection, data visualization, fault tolerance. These are various hyperledger incorporation. These are the places where you can go ahead and talk to the industry to help them get these new abilities inside their old system. Recall the first publication by Hesser et al., where they had used a Bosch data acquisition system with an accelerometer in an existing CNC, which didn't have these things. So you have to go and say that I can help you or we can help you incorporate these acquisition systems, which will in turn improve your efficiency of your plant. Thank you for your kind attention. I am done, sir.